he and I were the two naughty ones, where we'd have to be reined in once in a while. Carroll, Sally, stop it. He was very frustrated because he wrote the pilot that Norman told the world that he created it. And then people would say, well, where did you find the actors? Well, Carroll came part and parcel with it, but Norman would say, I just went out and looked for the best actor in America. We all lost our privacy. We all became so well known. I'm sure that sounds to people who don't achieve any fame as something that is fun and glamorous. It's hard. It's a difficult way to live. This is Rooney.
Hello, Mr. Rooney. Hello, Sally.
Hello. Hello, Rooney.
Anybody who knows you will attest. You are one of the funniest people in the biz, and you've honed your sense of humor as a kid to cheer up your mum who had severe depression.
Yeah, my mother would argue with that. She would be very depressed, first of all, that I told you all she suffered from depression, but she's not here. And I think wherever she is, she's forgiven me for talking about it because it is part of my life. But my mother, when she was interviewed about me, she would speak English a little bit incorrectly to make her point. She would say, people would say to her, was Sally like this her whole life? And she would say, well, Sally was born with funny. She said she recognized from the time I had, 20 words under my belt that my whole aim in life was to entertain. So I think that's what I came here to do. Yes, she couldn't get me to nap, so she would put me in my room. She'd go to her room and take a nap. And while she was napping, I'd play my record player. I'd throw things around the room. I'd jump on the bed. I'd open the window and say hi to the neighbors. She slept and I was busy.
You went to school in Oregon and you joined a theatre group there. Obviously, showbiz was your destiny.
Yes, but I thought I was going to be a doctor. And then I decided I couldn't do it because I could not work for a year on a cadaver. So then I was bereft because I had no idea if I wasn't going to be a doctor what I could possibly want to do. And it was my mother who said, well, why don't you be an actor? And she found the school for me in California. I was born and raised in Portland, Oregon, which is the state above California. And she and my aunt and uncle drove me down to Pasadena, California, dropped me off at this theater college, wished me luck.
That was the Pasadena Playhouse. And I mean, you think of some of the amazing people who've gone through there, the likes of Eve Arden, Gene Hackman, Dustin Hoffman. Did you come through the ranks with anybody that went on like you to become much loved, cherished, and very famous?
I don't think anyone in my class was that fortunate. But there were a few that I saw did get a lot of work, but no one that became a household name because no one was lucky enough to land a television series that changed the face of television in America.
For you, though, is this right, Sally? You started out doing TV commercials. Do you remember your first one?
My first television commercial, I was the talking lemon. They stuffed me in a lemon suit. From my crotch to the top of my head, I was a lemon, and then my legs were out. On the audition, they said, make the sound of a lemon. And I went,
this is just a bit out of nowhere. We were talking before we came on about the great Jacki Weaver, because you said you're often mistaken for one another. But I just want you to know this. So you started in a television commercial as a lemon. Guess what? She started in a television commercial as an asparagus spear. And she said to me, you know what? They had the casting all wrong. I'm so short, I should have been a squash. Can you not see the synchronicity running here?
There is synchronicity. There really, really is. I want to sneak into her room in the middle of the night and cut her a set of bangs, and then we're definitely identical twins. I'm constantly stopped and being told how much people love me in Yellowstone.
Yes.
And I have to say,
it's not me. It's Jacki.
And she tells me she gets asked too. People come up to her and say, hey, little girl.
You do look alike. Look at you.
Yeah, we do. If I pull my hair back, because she usually doesn't have bangs, we look exactly alike. I'm trying to get her to do a movie with me where we play twins.
Are you serious?
Oh, yeah. I've got friends working on it right now.
Well, I hope it happens, Sally, because that'd be hilarious. Whether you did a redo of something with twins or something completely fresh and new, why not? How fabulous.
I was told once by a teacher somewhere that there's a doppelganger on Earth for every single other human being, that most people don't meet their doppelganger in their life. But not only have I met mine, but she does the same thing I do. Speaking of doppelgangers, my father died when I was 20.
Yes.
And I was working at a property real estate firm in Beverly Hills as a receptionist. And I had a view of Rodeo Drive. That was the street it was on. And that's where all the big, fancy, expensive stores are. And I saw a man walking down the street, and I looked, and he looked just like my father. And I just lost my father.
Yeah.
And I yelled at someone to answer the phones, and I ran down the staircase and ran out of the street and chased him and caught up with him at the corner, and I tapped him, and he turned around, and I said, "You look just like my father, and my father died a couple of months ago. Would you please hug me?"
Oh,
And this absolute stranger took me in his arms and held me on that corner until I was ready to detach. Yeah, I was crying.
Oh, I can imagine. I'm fascinated by this story too, Sally. One of your earliest TV appearances was on the Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour, and that was 1967.
I have very fond memories because as a young girl growing up, I watched the Smothers Brothers on television. And then that was the first really big thing I landed after doing 30 television commercials. It's like I was hired to be on the team in every show doing comedy skits and silly stuff with Tommy and Dickie Smothers. And that made a lot of people who interviewed me ask me if I made that name up to be on the Smothers Brothers show. Struthers on Smothers Brothers. I said, no, that just is my name. It just serendipity. But I do have to admit to doing something illegal. There was a singing group on the show one week, a duo whose CDs I have and play to this day, named Bonnie and Delaney. Or maybe they went by Delaney and Bonnie. And they were real hippies, and they sang beautiful harmony and really cool songs. And they invited me into their dressing room, and I had to do a skit in about 10 minutes with Tommy Smothers. And they said, we're smoking some weed. You want some? I'd never done that. But I wanted to look cool to them. I said, sure. So, take another one. By the time I walked out to do the skit with Tommy, I didn't know who I was, let alone what I was supposed to say to him. So I just looked like a deer in the headlights, and I walked out to him on the set with the cameras rolling, and I said, "Hi, Tommy." They had to kill that skit. They had to fill the time with something else. I never did that again in my life, but oh my God, was I ashamed.
You lurch from there to a gig as a dancer on the Tim Conway Hour, and 5 episodes in, you are let go for apparently making the show look cheap.
Well, the producer writers were Sam Bobrick and Ron Clark, who wrote the first Broadway show I did subsequently, Wally's Cafe, with Jimmy Coco and Rita Moreno. But back in the time that I got hired, right after the Smothers Brothers summer show, I went right on the Tim Conway Comedy Hour, and their idea of a funny show for Tim was to make it look like it had no budget. So everything had to be done on the down low. So when the announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Tim Conway Comedy Hour," a camera panned the soundstage. There was nothing there. And finally, over at the end of the pan on the right was a man standing in front of a music stand with a tuxedo on, but the show couldn't afford an instrument for him. So he had to hum the opening theme song while reading the music. And then they go, "And now the Tim Conway dancer." Back in the day, we had a man on television in America who everybody loved named Jackie Gleason.
Yeah.
And he had this group of women, probably 16, 20 of them, called the June Taylor Dancers. And they were all as tall and beautiful and leggy as Rockettes. In New York, there were Rockettes. And they would do these amazing things and lay on the floor, and they would look like sea anemone and stars and flowers, and they would move their arms and legs and make patterns. So when I was the dancer on the Tim Conway show, I'm short. I would always be in a really stupid, ugly tap dancing costume. And they put too much dance sand on the floor, so I slipped all the time in my tap shoes. I'd lose my balance. And then I'd flop myself onto the floor and open my arms and legs and wave at my mother. But after the 5th show, the suits in New York said, "She's got to go. We don't like this." And the producers tried to explain to them that that's what was funny, but executives don't quite often understand funny. But guess what?
What?
If I hadn't been let go, I wouldn't have been available to read for the role of Gloria on All in the Family.
And that's how it came about, because Norman Lear had spotted you. Suddenly you're available. In you go for that read. How many other people tried out for that role of Gloria? Do you know?
I think he saw a couple hundred young ladies. He narrowed it down to 4. The last 4 of us went to CBS for the final audition with Rob Reiner, who'd already been hired to play the meathead, Mike Stivic. Carroll O'Connor and Gene Stapleton were already cast. Gloria was the last to be cast. And our audition was to go one at a time in a room where Rob was with all the CBS executives, Norman Lear and his producing partner, Bud York, and, 10 men in suits and ties in the room. And they would throw us the subject matter, and we were to do an improvisation with him. Well, guess who one of the other 4 women was sitting with me, young women? Penny Marshall. And he lived with Penny at that time, and they eventually married. But I knew that he was living with Penny, and so I thought, well, I'm not going to get this. He's already cast. He and Penny know each other's rhythms. They know each other's sense of humor. He's going to do a better job with her because he wants her to get it. I don't have to worry. This isn't going to happen for me. So I went in with no nerves because it seemed like I didn't stand a chance.
Of course, All in the Family was based on that brilliant British series Till Death Us Do Part with Warren Mitchell. But what was that level of fame like? Because it goes on to become the most watched sitcom on American television back in the 70s.
It's so hard to explain adequately without sounding negative, because one's privacy is rarely thought about in the humans that walk the earth that are not performers. They know to close the curtains if their glass in the bathroom is see-through when they're taking a shower, but they still in life have their privacy. But we all lost our privacy. We all became so well known that there wasn't any place we could go, anything we could do without instant recognition. And that, I'm sure that sounds to people who don't achieve any fame as something that is fun and glamorous. It's hard. It's a difficult way to live, because when you turn around, there's always 1 or 20 people staring at you. For me, I just worked in the state of Virginia, which is on the East Coast. I came home 3 days ago, and I missed my connecting flight because my first flight was delayed. So I had a 5.5 layover in Philadelphia.
Yes.
When I'm in an airport, every single human being has a cell phone, and so therefore everyone has a camera available on their person. And there's a few are polite enough to come up and ask. And then I drag them to some semi-private spot, usually by the ladies' restroom, and take a picture with them. But for the rest of the time, if I'm just sitting there and reading a book, I'll look up for a minute, and 3 people that are in the waiting area with me are all taking pictures of me while I'm reading. It's disconcerting. Or it's never pretty when you eat a salad. You try so hard to get all the loose ends of the lettuce up with your fork before you put it in your mouth, but inevitably one is hanging and you have to do a few extra moves to get it in your mouth. Someone's across the restaurant, take a picture of you eating salad, and that's going to be on the cover of the National Enquirer next week. It's not easy. I mean, they printed a picture, People magazine, but 3 months ago, of me riding a bicycle coming out of a gate on my house on my side street. And it wasn't me. It's my friend Karen, who lives here, who's 15 years younger than I am and 10 inches taller than I am, and very athletic, and rides her father's bicycle because he passed away several years ago, and she kept his bicycle. And they claimed that it was me. I mean, I'll be being mistaken for Jacki Weaver. I think that's fabulous. But when they claim it's me riding an old bicycle in my neighborhood, I don't ride them.
That's
Like,
right.
come on.
You told me an analogy, and this is stuck in my mind, of when you started All in the Family, you and Rob Reiner would go across to the farmer's market right behind CBS studios. So that was fine. You go there, you get your lunch, you'd come back, nobody paid any note. Then all of a sudden one day, that dynamic changed completely, didn't it?
Yes, it did. Couldn't go there anymore. Couldn't go there and get lunch and sit and eat it there. maybe could go over there and deal with people. But back then, people didn't have cell phones. But a lot of people in the farmers market are tourists, so they had their little Kodak cameras. Now everything changed. I mean, all sorts of things happened. Like a young girl who was smitten with me, used to follow me home every day from CBS. She'd follow me, and if I'd leave my apartment later to go run an errand, she had been waiting in the street, and she'd follow me to where. I mean, it got really crazy.
The upside was, for that role, in which you were so brilliant, 2 Emmy Awards for All in the Family. And look, Sally, you got to work with an amazing cast. Carroll O'Connor, for instance. What was the real Carroll O'Connor like?
He was a very bright man who was at times complicated. Was very loving. Loved to goof around on the set like I did. I mean, he and I were the 2 naughty ones where we'd have to be reined in once in a while. Carroll, Sally, stop it. We're doing the scene. But we would just start, as we say, farting around. You know, it wasn't Rob and me. Rob was the adult there in the room. It was Carroll O'Connor and me. He had a son that he and his wife Nancy adopted in Italy when he was there making Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor. And they told the priest that they wanted a baby and couldn't have one, and he found them a baby boy. And interestingly enough, even though they were handed a baby in Italy, he grew up to look a lot like Carroll, with blue eyes, blonde hair. And then he wound up playing one of the roles in Carroll's next TV series that was a big hit called In the Heat of the Night. But they didn't have a daughter. They didn't have any of the children. And here I was, young, and Carroll and his wife just took me under their wing. And that was wonderful. I lost my father 2 years before I got on the family, and I really needed a father figure in my life. It was really helpful to me to have an older married male make sure I was okay, which he did. But for the first few years, he was very frustrated because he wrote the pilot. He wrote it. Norman Lear had nothing to do with it. Norman Lear didn't know Carroll O'Connor existed. But Carroll and his writing partner couldn't get it picked up to somebody to make a pilot. That's when Norman got involved. And then what infuriated me over the years was that Norman told the world that he created it, and then people would say, well, where did you find the actors? Well, Carroll came part and parcel with it, but Norman would say, I just went out and looked for the best actor in America. He didn't have to look for Carroll. And it bothered Carroll a lot, because Carroll was a pretty good writer. And he'd written the pilot. And it took a while to teach our writers how to write for the 4 of us, what worked best. And we would do the reading around the table on the first day, and then Carroll would go home at night with a script, and he'd rewrite certain pages. And he'd bring in the next day, and he'd want it done. And it became a bargaining session between Mr. Lear and Carroll. And Carroll was frustrated. And because he was frustrated, his blood pressure went up. And so he had to take pills to calm himself down. And because his blood pressure was up out of nowhere, he would just all of a sudden have the horrible, uncontrollable nosebleeds. So for every time he was having fun, there'd be another time where he would remember how he had somehow lost control of the very thing he created. And he wanted the writers to be better. And he'd get really frustrated, and you'd see that side of him. But he was never anything other than wonderful to me.
Yes.
But interesting side note, when we were at work, he never to other people referred to me as Sally or Gloria. He would refer to me as the girl. And then I think the girls should move over there. You know, the girls line on the top of page 8. I found that a really interesting idiosyncrasy, that when we were at work, I wasn't either. I was the girl. But he was very conscious that I was a female. And he was very protective of me. It was lovely. And Jean Stapleton, she was an angel, as most Christian scientists seem to be, because they just will not think or say a negative thing. They live as pure a life as you can, a life like Jesus.
Just with regard to Carroll for a moment, Sally, I'll never forget the heartbreak of when his son Hugh, of whom you were talking, took his own life after falling into a drug hell. Carroll was very candid about that in an astonishing memoir that he wrote that I still have. And it's ever so haunting because I was there when he got his star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I just so remember the heartbreak that man and his wife Nancy had been through. And you were right there with them through all of that, weren't you?
Yeah. That was so. You look at that couple, Carroll and Nancy O'Connor, and you know that it might not be obvious every time you're with them, but you know that they have been permanently and forever changed.
Right.
That they will never be quite the same because their only beloved child chose to leave this earth.
And then Carol's death, that must have knocked you for a six.
I just always felt that he needed to go be with his son. I mean, yes, he had high blood pressure problems, and yes, he had diabetes, but I think he needed to go be with Hugh. I really do. And Nancy was a really, really strong woman. She was a little bit taller than Carol. She came from hardy stock of the wild mountain people in Montana. She was a Montana girl, which is where he met her at the University of Montana. And her personal strength got her through both losses. But now they're all gone. But what remains is Hugh's child. His son Hughes, who committed suicide, he was married and had a child. So there is still some of that.
Jean Stapleton, you were saying, was just such a beautiful woman.
Highly intelligent, raised in New York, mother an opera singer, but played a dingbat like she was one. But she did have one dingbat moment. In those 8 years I did the show.
Yes.
She was in the rehearsal hall. We were on a 10-minute coffee break. She was on a folding chair over in the corner looking at the Los Angeles Times classified section where people try to sell their cars and where you look for a job. And I saw steam coming out of her ears. She was reading like, oh. She said, would you look at this? This car wash is advertising for Polish men. I said, Jean, that's Polish.
Oh my!
That was the only stupid moment that I saw her have in the 8 years I was with her year round in a rehearsal hall.
She had this incredible intuition, didn't she, underneath that kind of dingbat facade?
Yes, I mean, she was certainly, for me, the best written and most brilliantly performed character of the four of us. Archie Bunker was straightforward. He was uneducated and therefore bounced on his father's knee and taught bigotry.
Yes.
And Mike Stivic was very bright and book smart and college student and liberal and was going to fight Archie all the way down to the pad. And Gloria was just kind of an afterthought. I was the fourth banana, and for the first 5 years, I only had about 3 lines each show, which was, where are you going, Michael? I'll help you set the table, Ma. And, oh, Daddy, stop it. That was it. The writers, we called them the Habim scribes, all older, brilliant Jewish men who used to write for, Sid Caesar and Jack Benny. They didn't know what to write for the girl. And that was my frustration. After 5 years of that, I tried to get off the show. I hired a lawyer, but I lost. I'm glad I lost. I'm glad I did the next 3 years. I had a lot more to do those 3 years.
Yes, that's right. They must have recognized then that this was frustration and they need to give you a bit of meat. Speaking of meathead Rob Reiner, we've been discussing. Now, of course, one of Hollywood's most powerful directors, When Harry Met Sally and Misery and A Few Good Men and so forth. Did you feel he had the makings of that kind of directorial greatness back then?
I saw all that he had, and I was in awe of him. We're pretty much the same age, but he was light years ahead of me in terms of the industry and the business of show. And I was maybe in my 3rd or 4th year of the show with him. And he brings one day into rehearsal hall, slaps a book down in front of me and says, read this. I said, why? He says, I've just acquired the rights to it. And as soon as my contract is over with All in the Family, I'm going to make this into a film. It was The Princess Bride. So he was in his mid-20s and he had already plotted out his career post Meathead. And I was just showing up every day, never thinking about the future. We called him our Sultan of Slice because we would read that script the first time around a table with all the CBS execs in the room listening and our script girl timing us and the writers listening where the things landing, where the jokes landing. And then we'd have a coffee break and then we'd go back because the script girl said, well, with laughter spread, it's 2.5 minutes too long. We have to cut out 2.5 minutes of dialogue. Rob Reiner was light years ahead of everyone with what to do. He would say, all right, everybody go to page 2. You see Edith and Archie's lines at the bottom of that page. You can cut it. You won't miss them. It doesn't ruin a joke. Okay, go ahead. Page 5. We'd be trying to catch up with them and marking our scripts. For the first few times that happened, either the writers or Norman Lear would say, stop. Don't write it in your scripts, everyone. We haven't decided if this is correct. But we quickly learned Rob was correct. As we read it for the first time, he could see what was superfluous. And he knew when we sat back down what to cut. A line here, 3 lines there. And he every once in a while would suggest if it was going to affect something. Well, take this line on page 19 out of Gloria's mouth, have Edith say it, and then it works for the rest of the thing. You'll see. And I'd be sitting there with steam coming out of my ears because I had 3 lines. So if you took one of them away, I had 2 lines. And one day in the rehearsal hall, he took me aside. He said, I really need to talk to you. I said, okay, what's up? He said, I think you're going to be happier if what you care about the most is the success of each of the episodes. What makes each one just the best piece of entertainment ever. If you count your lines and you see 1 or 2 of them go, you're going to be miserable. But if you want this episode to be really good and you can see bowing out of those couple of pages, help shorten it, make it be the right time to present it on the network with advertisements in the middle, you're going to be happier. And I forced myself to have that attitude. And after that, I was offering to give up a line. He fixed the whole thing for me. That's a very smart guy.
Did you two become great friends? Were you very close?
I thought we were. We were finished. Carroll and Jean were still doing the show, season 9 and season 10, but Rob and I were out in the world doing other things. And he would call me every once in a while, and he wouldn't say hello. He would just start a joke, and then he'd say it, and then he'd hang up. And back then you didn't have caller ID, so I would pick up the phone in my apartment and I'd say hello, and I'd hear his voice and he'd say, French policeman's fart. And he'd hang up. This went on for a few years. And then, boom, it stopped. And I didn't understand why it stopped, but there was a hit musical that came onto Broadway that Mel Brooks wrote, and then they finally made a film out of it called The Producers. And it was huge. It won all the Tony Awards in New York, and they brought a company of it out here to LA to play at our big Pantages Theater in Hollywood, and I was invited to be there for the first night, and my friend Bunny Bennett, who I grew up with in Portland, Oregon, flew down from Portland to be my date, and we went, and it's a huge theater. It must seat 12 to 1,500 people. And so you don't know who's there. And I'm so short, and when people are walking in, I see everybody's chests. I can't see who's there. But when it was over, Bunny and I walked into the theater onto Hollywood Boulevard, and there is Carl Reiner and his wife Estelle, and Rob Reiner and his new wife Michelle. And I went running toward him, screaming, Robbie! And he put his hand out ahead of me, really stiffly like the Tin Man, shook my hand, keeping me as far away from him as possible. And speaking robotically, he said, hello, Sally. Nice to see you, Sally. I was horrified. It was some sort of show, maybe for his new wife, to make sure that she knew that we did a show together, but I don't know. I have to guess what that was. But after that, I felt if I ever was walking down the street and saw him walking toward me, I would duck in an alley.
Yes.
It didn't want to ever have that thing happen.
Embarrassing situation
hate this.
again. And that's right. But I remember you telling me too, there was some weirdness about when Penny Marshall, his then wife, would come onto the set.
I loved Penny. I found Penny to be so interesting. And he did tell me one day at CBS, Penny's coming to the taping tonight. I said, why are you telling me that? She comes every week for the taping. He said, because I don't want you to say hi to her. Why? He says, she thinks you and I are having an affair. And I said, you're kidding. He says, no, she misunderstands your friendliness. You know, Sally, you are a lot like a Cocker Spaniel puppy. You just run up to everybody with your tail wagging, and she doesn't understand that kind of friendliness because that's not her personality. So she thinks it's a cover-up for something. So just wait. Wait till she says hello to you first. That took a few years. Anyway, I'm sorry she's gone because she directed films too, and she was amazing. And may she be resting in peace and also having a lot of fun with Cindy Williams up there somewhere. Friendships can change, not just in show business. People can ghost you and you don't know why. Just things change. They turn on a dime and you have to just let it go. I did see Rob a little over a year ago at the Emmy Awards. We presented the In Memoriam segment on the Emmys, and it was the first time he and I had seen one another in years, and that went just fine.
Bea Arthur was a great friend of yours. You know, she was in the Maude spin-off from All in the Family. Maude was Edith's cousin. And I know you absolutely adored Bea Arthur.
She was the deadpan, straight-laced, straight-faced, cut in through all the chuffer, just say a remark that bottom lines the moment. And she delivered those beautifully. But the first time I met her was when she walked into CBS and came to our rehearsal hall, and she was going to be on the show that week. And of course, Jean Stapleton knew her, and Carroll O'Connor knew her, and Rob might have known her, but I had never met her. And I was fascinated with her deep voice and how funny she was in real life. But the thing that blew me away is in the rehearsal process, you're 3 days in a rehearsal room. And then the fourth day, you move to the set to work on the set with the cameramen and the sound men who have to learn your dance. They have to follow you and all be in sync with you. So that takes a day and a half to perfect. And then the audience comes and you do it. Well, on the third day, the final day in the rehearsal room, you do a run through. You now are all, we call it off book. You know the lines. You don't have to hold your pages anymore. And now programs practices, which is Tweedledee, Tweedledum, and Tweedledummer, all come in the room, and they sit down in these chairs up against the mirror, and they're facing you, and they all have their scripts of your show on their lap, and they're not even watching you. They are watching the words to make sure you're saying the words that they see in their script. And B knew enough to know what would freak them out. And we're doing this scene, and B uses every swear word you've ever heard anyone say, sahiled, some horribly offensive. She's laced them into her dialogue as Cousin Maud. And Frank Lash passed us, those guys were thumbing through the script and looking at each other and looking at us and looking at me and looking back. They were horrified, and we were all trying not to laugh. She completely threw them all for a loop, and that's the day I fell in love with her. If I were gay, I would have stalked her. I loved her so much at that moment. Oh, my God.
She was certainly a force of nature. And speaking of forces of nature, 1970, your very first movie role, 5 Easy Pieces, with the one and only Jack Nicholson.
What a nice man. And we had a couple of scenes together. 3 scenes, I think. And that was it. And then I'm going to jump you to 25 years later. I'm in Tiffany's in Beverly Hills, not because that's where I shop, but because my Japanese hairdresser wants one of those Tiffany's boxes. So I'm in there with my friend Pam, and she says, Sally, turn around, Jack Nicholson is behind you. And I said, oh my gosh, okay. She says, well, go over there, say hi. I said, no. She said, come on, say hi. You made a movie with him. He hasn't seen you in years. I said, I don't want to. I don't want to. I'm not going to bother him. And she kept going at me while I'm trying to pay for this little box. And I finally said, would you stop it? I'm not going over there. He won't even remember me. I don't want to embarrass myself. As I'm signing the credit card thing, I feel a tap on my shoulder and I turn around and there he is right in my face. He says, hi, Sally. It's Jack. How are you? He came to me. He was charming, but not smarmy charming. Not trying to be charming because I was the young woman and he was a guy around me and he was just going to be I watched him be charming with everyone and it wasn't a forced charm. It was just who he is.
Yes.
And he's as funny, obviously, as he is charming. He's a real character of a human being. And I'm very sad to hear many times now that he's got some form of loss of memory, which is why we don't see him in films anymore. And I'm sorry that that's befallen him because that's an insidious way to go. That's the way my mom went. It's just awful to watch. I don't know who it's worse for, the family and friends of the person or the person. It's just awful. But boy, did he leave us with some classic films.
Likewise, too, you're in The Getaway with Steve McQueen and Ali MacGraw. That's the movie, in fact, where they kind of fell in love on the set.
I watched those two fall in love. It was pretty sweet. And Steve McQueen was a character too, but in a completely different way. I mean, all guy, all macho without being obnoxious. But when we had a 20-minute turnaround of camera and lights to shoot the same scene from a different direction, he'd go off the set and go out to his motorcycle and ride it 100 miles an hour around whatever city we were in, or up a dirt road with Sam Peckinpah yelling, "Get off of that thing! You're gonna kill yourself and then I can't finish my movie!" So much fun to watch. All of it, because Sam Peckinpah was always drunk. Steve McQueen was always hopping on his motorcycle. And Ali MacGraw was always coming over to talk to me because there were so many men around us and just the two of us. And so we would cleave on to one another. It was a great experience. And then somebody decided it was a really good idea to remake it with Alec Baldwin and Kim. What was her Basinger?
Yes.
Why would anyone remake a classic?
I tell you what, your voice is so familiar to a legion of kids. In the 70s, the Pebbles and Bamm-Bamm cartoon show, Jay North, who we just lost, he was Bamm-Bamm, but you were Pebbles.
Boy, was that fun to work at Hanna-Barbera. And to work with Jay North, who I had grown up watching him as a little boy, play Dennis the Menace, and now he's standing right beside me at a microphone right next to mine, and we're recording a cartoon show. And he was so easy to embarrass. And you know I latched onto that. So when he'd be in the middle of a line, I would just reach over and pat one of his behind cheeks. And he would turn crimson and completely flub his line. And I fall over laughing because that's all it took. But now that he passed us and you read these things on the news, you see that his aunt and uncle treated him horribly. I guess they were raising him. I didn't know that. And if he didn't get something, they were on the set when he was working as a little boy, and if he didn't get a take that was called "That's a Print" in 2 tries, they punished him.
Yeah, horrible, heartbreaking story, and that's kind of why he wound up getting out of showbiz and doing things completely divorced from all of that. Stage is one of your great loves. In fact, I'm guessing it probably is your first love.
Yeah, I studied at a theater school. I did theater in elementary school and high school. Theater's the first thing that got me going, and it's the one leg of show business that requires you to be fearless, because when you make a movie like The Getaway, if you aren't believable or you flub your line, something goes wrong, you just do another take. And then it's going to be perfected by the director and editors. It's all going to be all cut up, made pretty and wonderful, and no one's going to ever see you made a mistake. But when you're on stage, you can't make a mistake. And if you do, you somehow have to fix it.
You must have had that moment where you just lost a line, you went up, you dried, or somebody else has done that and you've got to somehow romp to the rescue. What was the most cringing and embarrassing moment?
My first Broadway show was with James Coco, and Rita Moreno, and it was just the three of us and Wally's Cafe, and it took place in a little hamburger-shaped cafe out in the desert halfway between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. And the first act, I stopped by because I'm hitchhiking to Los Angeles. And then the second act, I have never made it to Los Angeles, and I'm in a waitress outfit, and I'm working for them. And in that break between Act 1 and Act 2, I had to hurry up and run backstage and get out of my little tap dancing dress and my little wig and have different hair and a waitress cap on and come. And I do that right on the side of the stage. There's no time to even go to a dressing room. You're in the dark. You hope the crew's not looking at you because you're stripping down. You're pulling a wig off. You're pulling another wig on. And I heard Jimmy Coco and Rita Moreno saying things that they'd never said in the show before. And I stood there frozen for a moment. And then I realized they were making up dialogue because I still had another entrance in that first costume and wig. I just never came back out. I've now changed to Act 2, and they're left high and dry. And so they finally decided to sing to each other and dance, and they just danced off stage. I just ruined everything. I ruined everything. And yet no one died. I'm still here.
And the audience probably was none the wiser.
Yeah, it has to work. It's funny how if your brain is healthy, it trips into overdrive and you come up with your people on stage some way to all save yourselves and get back on track. I can tell you, no film actor wants to ever have that kind of pressure. They will not step on a stage. Very few people that have made themselves a success as an actor doing real movies. They don't want to walk on stage and have to know 100 pages of dialogue, because when you're making a movie, you might only shoot 3-4 pages a day. That's all you have to know, and then you can throw it away. It's never coming up again.
Yep.
But when you're on stage, you have to know 120 pages without stopping.
You more recently starred in the Gilmore Girls as the wacky neighbor Babette Dell, and that looked like a role you were having a whole heaping lot of fun in, that's for sure.
Oh my goodness. My manager sent me on that audition. I was performing in Vegas in a musical called Always Patsy Cline. It's a 2-woman musical. And they said, you've got to come down to LA and show up in the morning on Monday at Warner Brothers to read for this part. They're looking for someone 5 foot tall or under. And her name is Babette Dell, and she's married to a jazz musician, Maury Dell. And you meet the height requirements, so you just got to go in and charm them. So I went in, and the first thing that happened in that room with 3 people in the room, the husband and wife producers, Amy Sherman Palladino and her husband, Dan Palladino, and then another producer named Gavin. And right away, I said, your name is Gavin? I said, my sister Staub's name is Gavin. And because, want to know why? Because our grandfather was Gavin Struthers from Scotland. I mean, I just was riffing. I'm just badly looking anyway to socialize. And anyway, I barely walked out of Warner Brothers when my phone rang, and my manager said, you're going to play Babette. Here's what happened. I've closed in the musical in Vegas. I came to LA. I went to my first day of shooting at Warner Brothers. I'm in the makeup chair in a long trailer. And someone who's called an AD, assistant director, and they're usually very young and they're willing to do anything, get you eggs, get you coffee, drive you in a golf cart to the set. He said, I got to get you down to the set. The director is ready to run your scene with the Lorelei. And then we'll bring you back. We'll finish your hair and makeup. So I'm sleepy. I've had no sleep. I did my last day of work in Vegas and took the last plane out of Vegas at midnight back to LA, and I have to be there at 6 a.m. And so I've had maybe 4 hours of sleep. So we run the scene. No, we're going to run the scene, but the director, who I don't know, says, have you met your husband? And I said, no, obviously he's got to be here somewhere because we're about to do a scene. He says, yeah, that's him walking toward you right now. Here's this guy that looks like Abraham Lincoln. He's really tall, really lanky. And I said, oh my, okay. Yeah, you did really cast for the height difference. And he says, Ted, Sally, Ted, nice to meet you. He said, okay, run the scene. We ran the scene. And then he's looking at the sky. He says, the sun is coming up so fast. Why don't you two sit in those lawn chairs over there? I'm going to discuss with the crew if we need to move you to a different spot in Lorelei's backyard, and then we'll run it again. So I'm sitting there almost falling asleep, and the guy next to me, the tall drink of water, he's falling asleep. But I hear him say to me, so how are things in Portland with your friends and family? What? He says, your friends and family in Portland where you were born. And I said, well, how do you know I'm from Portland? And he got this Cheshire Cat grin on his face. Yeah. I said, no. No. He says, mm-hmm. I said, they sent me the script in Vegas, and not only did I get the script for the words, but the front page inside the cover page was a list of the character names in the series and then the actors' names who would be playing it. And I saw your name, and I thought, oh, that's really weird. Could it be? And then I thought, no, it couldn't be, but you are? He said, uh-huh. I said, so you're Ted Rooney, son of Ed Rooney, my high school math teacher. You went to Grand High School, too? Uh-huh. I said, I didn't know you in Grand High School. He says, well, I'm a little younger than you. I said, well, no one will ever know I with as tall as you are. You look older than I do. Wow. That's why my dog's name is Rooney.
There you go. That's kind of a full circle moment, isn't it?
There you go.
You don't stop working, Sally. You're with Ted Danson in a TV series recently, Man on the Inside. Is that coming back for another season? Has that been renewed?
Within 2 weeks of coming on the air last November, it was picked up for another season. It's the fastest show that Netflix, the time to take to pick a show up. It went to #1, and we, who played the people in the senior living situation, just assumed that we would never be seen again, because really the bottom line of the series is that he's been hired by this woman at a detective agency to pretend to be a detective and figure out a crime. So he figured out the crime at the end of our 8 episodes. So they'll send him on another caper, and he'll be in a whole new setting. So although we were lucky enough to be part of season 1, that's it. We're going back. I'm going to be in 2 of the episodes of the new season.
Oh, that's fantastic news.
The gentleman who plays my husband on it, the actor John Getz, he let me know that we're in the last 2, and that Ted's character, Charles, gets us to help him with the caper. So I think that's going to be fun to help him with the detective job.
Oh, that's fantastic, Sally, because you don't know where that might lead. I want to take you to 2 interviews that are completely polar opposites. 1978 on the Dinah Shore show, you and Gene Stapleton were interviewed by the late, incredibly great Bette Davis. Just take me back to your thoughts on that.
I don't know if anyone could ever judge what a star, a celebrity, a renowned human being is going to be like in person. You have your own feeling and worries. You don't want to say the wrong thing. Are they going to be friendly? Are they going to be aloof? You go into it hesitantly. And within 2 minutes, we knew that she's in the earth. She's not just down to earth. She was earthy and hilarious. And everybody's impression of her is correct. Doing an impression of her, she talks exactly the way anybody that's trying to do her does, Bette Davis. And you just sit there transfixed, because she really is that unique. She said the most famous thing that she did that intrigued me was she was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he asked her this question, and what she was referring to was a street in Los Angeles, but only people who live here would know what she was. People in Australia had no idea what her comeback was. But he said, Miss Davis, hopefuls come to Hollywood from all over the world every year because they want to be an actor. Do you have any advice for them? And she said, take Houghton. That's a street that's the fastest going east and west. It has the least traffic. Take Houghton.
Oh, that's brilliant.
We went to Washington, D.C. to dedicate Archie and Edith's chairs to the Smithsonian Institute.
And she came with you?
She came with us.
You've had some pinch yourself moments, haven't you? Which brings me to this one, Sally. This is the mid-70s. That was when Australian comedy king Gary McDonald as his alter.
Norman Gunston.
Norman Gunston turns up on your doorstep. Now, just tell me, when you opened that door and you were confronted with Norman Gunston, what in hell went through your head?
There's no way the people listening to this right now know any of my personal quirks, and I have a lot of them, but one of them, which is painful and kind of restricts me in life, is that I'm linear. If you tell me something, I take the words you said literally, and that's what goes in. So when they said a journalist from Australia wants to interview you, I likened this person in my head to our most famous journalist, Walter Cronkite. They said, he's going to come to your apartment in West Los Angeles near the UCLA University, and he's bringing a camera crew, and he's going to interview you in your apartment. I said, oh. So ding dong at my door, open my door, and there's a man standing there in a threadbare, shiny suit that he's probably had since his bar mitzvah or his high school graduation. And he's got little pieces of toilet paper with blood on them all over his face because he's cut himself so many times shaving. And he's got a Zero Mostel comb over of 12 hairs on the top of his head. I was equal parts horrified and amused, but I didn't want to laugh because he's a journalist. And I just thought, well, God bless the people in Australia for letting him be a journalist. But what's wrong with him? Why did they buy him a new suit? He comes in and he starts interviewing me, and everything he says is outrageous. I was like the RCA Victor dog. I just kept tipping my head sideways. What? And I couldn't stop laughing, and I laughed all the way through the interview. I made friends with a young man from Australia, and he's a singer, tap dancer extraordinaire. He told me, he said, oh, don't you know about your interview with Norman Gunston? It's all over on YouTube, and everybody watches it. I said, my God, that was like in 1972 or 73. People are watching it 50 years later. He said, yes. This is Trent Kidd who told me this. Trent Kidd is an Australian who is here and in New York and taken the world by storm. And I love hanging out with him because I am a sucker for a good dialect. And when he talks, that's one of the dialects I can't do. I cannot pretend to be Australian. I can do 3 different kinds of Southern American.
Yeah.
I can do a New York American. I can do Scandinavian. I can do Northern European Jew. I cannot do Australian. I cannot twist my brain to make my voice do that.
We chatted not long ago with your very dear friend, Brenda Vaccaro.
Oh, my darling Brenda. Isn't she something? Isn't she hilarious?
She's fantastic, Sally. And she said, my God, my dear friend Sally Struthers has just been here. She was over there in that room.
When I'm there, I sleep on her couch, and she's got one of those long couches that has a section that goes like this that could be like a chaise.
Yeah.
And it's not a very long chaise. I mean, it was good for me or Billy Barty, but it's not good for anybody over 5 feet tall. But she said she'd get up in the morning and tiptoe into the living room, and there I'd be all scrunched up in the corner. It would make her so happy. And then this is what you get when you stay at Brenda's. She says, it says, good morning, honey. She says, hi, doll. Hi.
You must miss her like mad since she left from Los Angeles.
I do, but we talk and text all the time, and I'm in New York at least once a year, and I always spend all of my downtime with her.
Just for the past hour we've had, and I've been blessed to be in your company at Tommy Troop Place. You are such a joyous person brimming with wonderful stories. Have you ever thought of doing a memoir?
Because of Carol Cook and Tom Troop, I have become my closest male friend in my life now is their nephew, Mark. And he's become my go-to person for questions about life and questions about the arts and questions about anything, because even though he's younger than I am, he knows so much more than I do. He's scary smart. He's sitting across from me right now. And he has convinced me to write a memoir, and he's going to help me.
That is excellent to hear. And Mark, I know you can hear me. That is fantastic.
See how everything goes full circle if you let it?
I know it does.
It winds up looking like the logo for the Olympics. There's just all these circles of different colors.
You are one of the most joyous people I've had the great joy of being in company with, and I could not thank you enough for being so...
Well, I hope we do this again. I hope this isn't our last time, and I really, really hope you are coming with your friends back to LA so that we can hang out.
You're delightful, divine, and fabulous, and we will talk again. You're on a promise.
Thank you, Craig Bennett. Bye, everybody.
Sally Struthers is something else, isn't she? But what an absolute gem and a treasure. And we've got more gems and treasures coming your way very soon, right here on Celebrity Drop. So if you want to be part of the fun, you know what to do? Of course you do. You hit that subscribe button. It's down there somewhere. No, there, I think. No, is it that way? Anyway, it's somewhere. Hit the button that says subscribe, then you're in the loop. And I look forward to dropping more fabulous celebrity interviews for your listening and dancing pleasure very soon. Catch you then. Bye.